No, no, they're available. They're available. Yep. Thank you for asking.
4. One.
Welcome. All of you are students from Bullard, Tenaya, and maybe from Fort Miller. So there's 3 schools. I won't tell you the whole story of how you came to be the ones, but I have to say I'm very happy that you're here. And thank you so much for being part of this contest. So without any more words, what I want to tell you is that if you look at your program, we have a dedication of the whole ceremony and of the song that we're going to sing. So Dr. Renee Cisneros will read the dedication. It's right at the top of the program.
Thank you. Dr. Betty Leone. Welcome to the Richard Stone Discovering Diverse Youth Voices Essay Contest.
You need to speak into the microphone.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Richard Stone Discovering Diverse Youth Voices Essay Contest. We dedicate the following song to children and young people, youth and teenagers everywhere, especially migrants and immigrants, refugees, whose voices must be heard. We need to listen to our young people. For all children who yearn to be free, held in detention centers and cages in prison-like conditions, without space to breathe, clean, nutritious food, playtime, medical care, or education, isolated from families, from parents, prohibited from speaking in fear of being sent back to a country where they came from, where there were lots of violence. Today, we honor diverse youth voices, and we move closer to a nonviolent Fresno.
How many of you, if you could raise your hand, know the song "We Shall Overcome"? Probably if you know the song, you're a little older. That's okay. This is a good time to teach it to the people that are learning it. Well, this was written by Pete Seeger, when I say context by Joan Baez, if you don't know Joan Baez, she was one of my favorite singers from the 60s and 70s. I went online to see if I could listen to "We Shall Overcome" just one time. And I went online, and what do you think? I saw Joan Baez singing in the White House to Michelle and Mr. Obama, President Obama, and their kids, their daughters. And it was amazing. And she had a little anecdote, so I put down here context. Joan Baez told a little story. It's very brief. If you look at the last verse, it says, "We are not afraid today." Dr. King was getting ready to announce that he was against the Vietnam War, and it was in the 1960s, and nobody was against the war at that time. But he knew that was the right thing to do. So he knew he would have some pushback, like big time. I don't know the year, but he said, "I'm afraid." And that's why he asked Pete Seeger, when they sang this song, they had to add that verse, "We are not afraid." And it's present tense, and it's today. So when we start singing, when you get to that part at the end, you'll know this is why they were singing "We are not afraid," because they were afraid, and they needed to sing it loudly, and they needed to get their voices out to tell people. As if you read about nonviolence, many of you read some of the readings that came with the contest, and that's one of the principles of nonviolence, is that you are courageous, because you are ready for people to come at you maybe in a violent way, but you don't respond with violence. And I'm not an expert on that, but I do know that what I've learned over the years, "We Are Not Afraid" is an important thing that we sing together. So we're going to have Avigdor and myself and Renee, and all of you that know the song, if you want to stand up. You don't have to stand up, but those of us here that know the song, we're going to sing together. And we'll get our music person here, Avigdor, to get us on the right note. We don't need any instruments. We'll start singing together. Go ahead. Not too high, not too low.
Okay, here we go.
And you can stand up if you want. It's up to you. All right, go ahead.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Everybody.
We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Thank you. We have extra programs when you're leaving if you don't have one right now. So we're going to have a few words by Abhidar honoring Richard Stone. And after Abhidar talks about honoring Richard Stone, I will talk a little bit about the topic of nonviolent Fresno. Then we'll have a few words from Ms. Mason, from Mr. Francis, from Dr. Cisneros, from Sukaina, and from Marianne. And we'll tell you each person as they come up. So Abhidar, thank you.
I'll keep it really brief. This was a competition that Richard started several years ago. And at that time, it was had a very small beginning. There were maybe 3 or 4 applicants, and he didn't follow up with it because I think he got distracted, and we didn't. But Betty picked it up. This is Betty, and she's really has blossomed into this competition, and I think Richard would just be overwhelmed and happy and surprised. You know, he was an educator and he lived his life as a peaceful person, and this is exactly what he would have wanted. So thank you all the applicants and the essay writers and everyone who's coming here. This is really great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this like 5 minutes. I told everybody 5 minutes, so I have to make mine 5 minutes too. So this is about the topic of nonviolent Fresno. And before I begin, you're all going to get a bag. Everybody that wrote an essay is going to get one of these blue bags. And the finalists will get a different color bag. But in that bag, there's a brochure from a place called Pace e Bene, which is Italian. Pace, P-A-C-E, means peace. E, the letter E means and And bene, B-E-N-E, in Italian means good. So they say, in English, they say peace and all good. So when I mention pace bene in my little introduction here, you'll know what I'm talking about. There is a brochure in your bag about pace bene. So yesterday morning, as I was opening up my email to read my favorite online news source called Common Dreams, I read this sentence that connected me with the reason that all of us have put in so much time and energy for this essay contest, you and me, about nonviolent Fresno. So I'm going to quote the activist and author, she's a writer, Naomi Klein, one of my favorite people. Common Dreams is a daily, glorious taste of what the dominant media could be if it were shaped by our common dreams of justice and peace. In the meantime, we owe an enormous debt to Common Dreams, which does so much to keep the dream of that alternative world alive. I can easily say this about the Fresno Center for Nonviolence. You have helped us, Angela, Abigdar, everyone part of the Fresno Center for Nonviolence, you have helped us all keep the dream alive for a nonviolent world, a world founded on peace, justice, equality, and the common good. So I thought about our little contest, which began very late in the year. With this contest, we are hoping to begin the important task of encouraging many diverse youth voices to be heard, to be free, and to be celebrated. It is common knowledge that in order to create any new order, any new and big change in society and the world, we must have a vision. We have to see it. With this contest, we wanted to encourage a vision of a nonviolent Fresno. A few years ago, in 2016, we proposed that the city of Fresno pass a resolution for a week of peace. And sure enough, you can find this resolution, sponsored by the councilperson Soria and Baines, signed by the entire city council. You can find that on their website, or you can call Soria's office. Yes, you are correct. This was symbolic, but it was a first step. So symbols are sometimes important. Now with your essays, these essays, we celebrate another step. This is another step, very important. In these essays, we hear you saying there is a need for nonviolent education in the middle schools and high schools. We hear students saying, asking each other to be leaders, to step up and be leaders, and to ask questions about the two Fresnos, the great inequalities, about the guns, the poverty, and the homelessness. All of these are part of a violent society. But when we begin to notice them, talk about them, ask questions, and suggest ways to change, to move to a nonviolent Fresno, then we begin to strip away the feeling that things are the way they are and that is that. But that's not true. With this contest, we can begin to focus on agency and authorship for youth, underlining the idea that we are not objects but subjects in our world, whether we be 12 years old or 16, 26, 56, 30, 76, all the different ages of people in this room. As agents of change, agents working together, we can create a nonviolent Fresno. Writing about our vision is a huge first step. Congratulations. And sharing what you write is always the next huge step. Sharing, as authors always do. You can be a writer, but if you're an author, you share. And I would like to thank all the teachers and students who took up the challenge to write and encourage diverse youth voices in Fresno. We thank you for helping your students to write and lift their voices, helping all of us to envision a nonviolent Fresno. Thanks also to Pachi Bene, the brochures are in your bag, who with their focus on peace and all good, began their campaign nonviolence and nonviolent cities projects several years ago, which you can read about in the brochure and on the website. And so to conclude, I'm talking to all the writers here. To conclude, dear young writers, all of you who wish to share your essays more widely, please contact me via the Zoho email that you have, and if you don't know where it is, I'll tell you later. It's on the website for the Fresno Center for Nonviolence. Your teachers know the website, the email address. We can talk about possible next steps if you're interested, such as a writer's circle, peer mentoring, revising, editing, and collecting the essays into a little publication, maybe something that Pachi Bene or the Fresno Center for Nonviolence would like to publish. You could share your essays with Fresno children, teens, adults, city and county leaders, organizations, businesses, churches, and all who dream of a nonviolent Fresno, a Fresno of equality, justice, and peace for all. Thank you. Now we have a few words that we're going to hear from Ms. Mason, Dorothy Mason from Tenaya, Mr. Francis, Onesta Francis from Bullard, and then from Mr. Hanna. I don't know, is Mr. Hanna here? Mr. Hanna is not here. Okay. So then after that, Dr. Cisneros will say a few words as a writer, author, and Sukaina Hussein, and then Marianne. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. Sukaina is from the Council on American Islamic Relations. Marianne Lecomte is from Wings Advocacy Fresno. And if I've forgotten anybody's titles or affiliations, I apologize. I think that's all. And then after that, we'll announce the winners.
Good afternoon and happy summer to my students. I'd like to thank you all for taking time off to come and be honored. The essay itself was a little bit challenging. It was during our testing, and I didn't have the direction that I just want everyone to know that these students did it all on their own. I had a few that did come to ask me questions, proofread it, but what we did is we took it a step down. As young adults or 12 and 13-year-olds, we aren't thinking about nonviolence being what's happening outside in the world. So Betty gave me an idea of let's drop it down. So we kind of focused on what can we do to change our school climate at Tenaya Middle School. And I had one student that wrote truthfully, and I read it, and she's like, I'm going to get suspended. I go, no, you're not. I said, this is an essay, this is your feelings, and you're using evidence, and that's what we've been teaching students to do, is to use evidence. And what I liked about this essay, it included about 6 different clips of articles about nonviolence, and that's exactly what we've been studying, how to take evidence and use that to support our feelings. And this is exactly what a lot of my students did. So I threw it out there during testing. I thought I'd get a little bit more bite, but those that did took it and ran with it. Some of you I had to pull teeth, but I want to honor you again for committing to finish. And I'm pleased again at the turnout, and I hope all of my students and everyone else continues to read. Find something that you like to do, and the more you read, the better writers you'll become. Again, let us know, or let Betty know if you'd like your essay to be published, or we'll find ways that we can publish, because we're taking what we're teaching and making it real world. I know some classes will write and make comments or opinions to editorials. This is your first step, taking that writing process, moving it on into an essay that is outside of the school environment and going out there into the community. So again, congratulations to all the students that wrote. You're being honored, and there are finalists as well. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. First of all, let's give a big round of applause for Betty Leonin for putting this on. She's done a great job. And also big students, make sure we thank all our parents and family for supporting the students. Give them a round of applause as well. You know, I was really excited when the opportunity to participate in this competition came along. I found that some of my students have some of the most insightful thoughts on how we need to progress as a society. My dad is an educator. He's been teaching for many, many years. He's just getting ready to retire. And he always used to tell me that a young person that puts their mind to something is a truly unstoppable force. And I hope that each of the students in here understand just how powerful you are and what you are capable of. With that being said, this topic really touched a nerve with a lot of us in the room. And when I opened it up to some of my students, they gave me some of the most insightful responses when I said, look, how are we going to make Fresno a nonviolent place? Many of them shared, hey, how are we going to become nonviolent if we don't solve our economic disparity issues? How are we going to become nonviolent if we don't start taking care of our mental health needs? And I was really proud to see all the great ideas that they came up with. Some of the stuff they said reminded me of actually my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quote. He says that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who stay neutral during a time of moral crisis. And right now, our town, our society, and our community, our country at large is coming into some moral crisis where we are going to have to step up, be strong, and be accounted for. And I'm really proud to see that we have some strong young men and women ready to step up to the challenges that are coming soon. Thank you guys for all coming out, and thank you for your time.
Thank you again, all of you, for being here today and accompanying young people, parents, neighbors, friends, and again, Betty Leone, all the work, and Evik Dar in setting up the venue here. Thank you so much. I thought I'd just tell you in a few minutes a little bit about my 75 years of work in education. 50 years. I'm turning 75 in August, and so I'm really excited about hitting the three-quarter century mark. But I did spend 50 years in education, 25 years as a university professor and 25 years in community education. And for me, it's been just my second love, after my wife, my wife for 45 years, Betty Leone. Reading and writing is just so important, and I dedicated my whole life to it. It started with my grandmother when I was 5 years old. She would take me on a real hot summer day in Texas, and she would take me inside because we're not supposed to play outside because it was so hot and humid along the Texas Gulf Coast. And she would sit me down next to her and take my right arm, and she would open a big book. I'm not proselytizing here, but it was her favorite book, big scriptures. And she would take my hand and start reading to me and move her hand over the letters as she would read. And I was 5 years old, and she would read these stories about some brothers that had this rivalry, and one of them was sold to the merchants and sent off as a slave to Egypt, and then he was working for the king. And then she would read me another story about a child that was born, and he was put in a little basket and would go off into the river, and then the queen would find this baby. All these fantastic stories, and I was just sitting there, and she would guide my hand, and it turned me on to reading. As soon as I could read, I just started grabbing books. So reading and writing go together. You read and you discover the world. So I just wanted to share that little anecdote about reading and writing, and about also being generous and sharing, because in education, as all these educators know here, we share what we learn. It's not about this is for me and just for me and I'm better than you, but when you're an educator, you share what you're learning, and you want everybody to learn that. So I've done some writing along. Right now I'm writing my memoirs, including the little story I told you about my grandmother, but many other ones. And I just wanted to share that with young people, because I feel that young people are the key to all societies. And we as humans naturally communicate. And we as humans naturally express ourselves, our feelings, and our dreams. And we as humans have also discovered a way of writing this down. And that's why we write, to share what we experience. And because we are social beings, we're community people. We have always been community people since the early ages. There were tribes, there were clans, there were communities, societies, kingdoms, civilizations, where we talk to each other. And what young people today are here, all of you, and all the adults that are supporting it, we're being human and sharing and communicating. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Hanging in there? All right. My name is Sukaina Hussein, and I serve as the Outreach Director in Central California for the Council on American Islamic Relations. The Council on American Islamic Relations is the largest Islamic civil rights organization in the United States. We're excited to have a new office in Fresno, so come visit us downtown if you're ever in the neighborhood. We are an organization that focuses on protecting civil rights of people, on protecting immigrants, on making sure that communities are empowered and have a voice, and making sure that people are civically engaged. That means they're voting, they're holding elected officials accountable, and they're actually having a voice in the process of making policies. So I am so excited and thankful to be here amongst students, amongst faculty who are amazing, amongst community members, and I want to thank Betty as well for all of her hard work in putting this together. So Mr. Francis already said this, but our youth are powerful. Do you guys know you're powerful? Yeah, you're powerful. All right. So this essay contest was to help us discover voices of youth. But what we really learned through this process was how youth identified truths of Fresno and truths of their experiences in Fresno. In these essays, the students right here today talked about the types of violence that we often see in media. So they talked about gun violence, they talked about domestic violence and human trafficking. They even talked about different kinds of abuse people see, like through racism, prejudice, xenophobia, homophobia, things like that. But in uncovering this violence, they talked about different issues they face. They talked about experiences they have every day, and that the violence that our communities face is not only physical, it's much more than that. When students are not able to walk safely to school, that's a form of violence. When they fear they might lose a family member because they're undocumented and might get deported, that's another form of violence. When families don't have access to healthy food close by to their home, that's a form of violence they experience. When Black and brown students are punished unfairly and more than their white counterparts, that's another form of violence. When students don't have a healthy home, or they don't have homes with clean water, or they live in homes that are filled with mold and infestation because their landlords aren't taking care of it, that's another form of violence. When students don't have jobs and opportunities, they don't have a chance to get a job in the summer or when they graduate, that's another form of violence. And we talked about this, but when people who are mentally ill don't have options for treatment, those are other forms of violence. Students recognize the different versions of Fresno. Betty talked about that as well. They recognize the inequity when some neighborhoods get a lot more investment, a lot more parks, a lot more green space than other neighborhoods. They listed so many challenges that one student actually said, "I can keep going on, but my hand is getting tired from typing." There's so much violence that are faced by some students, but they refuse to succumb to it. In one essay, one student said that in order to overcome these challenges, quote, "we need to work together as a city." Another student said, "we need to learn to live with and around each other." Another student said, "we shouldn't fear our neighbors. We can actually come together and make a difference." Our students recognize what we need to do to have real change. One student said, "all it takes is a couple of us leaders to come together and say, no, I'm going to be different." One student named that in order for our community to stop being violent, we just have to stand up and lead the way. This includes recognizing our shared humanity and treating each other with dignity and respect. I was touched by a student who talked about the need for treatment options for those with mental health issues. The student said, "We don't need an institution for them. We need housing. We need to make sure we treat these people with dignity and make them feel comfortable. Treat them like humans, right?" In order to achieve this nonviolent Fresno, students know we need systemic change. Another student talked about the difficulty of finding work for the people who are formerly incarcerated. This student said, "I'll give you an example of when someone gets out of jail and they're really trying to change for the better, but they try to go and get a job and no one wants to give them a job because they were incarcerated." The disparities of income and the inability to access resources was not forgotten either. One student said, "Prices needed to be changed for the less fortunate." That means there needs to be affordable housing, affordable insurance, and affordable health care. I speak directly to our young people and our community. You guys see the need to recognize each other's shared humanity, to treat each other with dignity and respect, and to bring systemic change in order to really create a nonviolent Fresno. You've written about your experiences, you've shared about your pain, but now we need to find ways to take action. We need to find ways to do what you said. Stand up, say no, I'm gonna be different. We need to figure out and join these organizations in Fresno that actually encourage youth to lead the way, to create the change that they want, and to do what you guys said. Just come together and find a way to make a difference. So I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us, for giving us a chance to learn more about your experiences. I want to congratulate our finalists, and I just look forward to the amazing impact all of our students will have. Thank you.